Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a torn piece of fabric, squinting at the massive crystalline structure that dominated the horizon. The Star-Relic stretched impossibly high into the alien sky, its surface covered in geometric patterns that hurt his eyes when he looked too closely. 3 months he'd been stranded on this godforsaken rock, and the ancient alien artifact still made his skin crawl. The escape pod's emergency beacon had died weeks ago. His water recycler was functioning at 60% efficiency, and the food synthesizer kept producing gray paste that tasted like cardboard mixed with regret. But Marcus was a mechanic, and mechanics didn't give up. They fixed things until they worked, or they died trying. He crawled back under the twisted wreckage of his pod, tools cluttering around him in the red dirt. The fusion drive had taken a direct hit from space debris during his emergency landing. Most people would have seen twisted metal and given up. Marcus saw a puzzle that just needed the right approach. The sun, if the blue-white giant overhead could be called a sun, was setting when he heard the first roar. It echoed across the barren landscape like thunder, but thunder didn't make the ground shake. Thunder didn't carry the promise of teeth and claws and hunger. Marcus rolled out from under the pod, grabbing his plasma wrench. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it could cut through steel plating when cranked to maximum power. The roar came again, closer this time, and he caught sight of movement near the Star-Relic's base. They were massive. The first one that emerged from behind the crystalline spires stood nearly 20 feet tall, with scales that shimmered between deep purple and black in the dying light. Its wings were folded against its serpentine body, and when it opened its mouth to roar again, Marcus saw rows of teeth that could bite a shuttle in half. Dragons. Actual, honest-to-God dragons. On an alien world orbiting a dying star, surrounded by technology that predated human civilization by millions of years, Marcus had found dragons. The first dragon wasn't alone. 2 more emerged from the relic's shadows, then 3 more. They moved with predatory grace, their massive heads swiveling as they scanned the area. One of them, the largest, with silver markings along its neck, lifted its snout and inhaled deeply. Marcus held perfectly still, his heart hammered against his ribs as the silver-marked dragon's gaze swept across the landscape. Those eyes were intelligent, calculating. This wasn't some mindless beast. It was hunting, and it had caught his scent. The dragon's head turned toward his hiding spot with mechanical precision. Their eyes met across 50 meters of barren ground, and Marcus felt something primal and terrified wake up in his hindbrain. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The nearest cover was the Star-Relic itself, and that's where the dragons had come from. The silver-marked dragon took a step forward, then another. The others followed, spreading out in a hunting formation that spoke of intelligence and coordination. Marcus raised his plasma wrench with hands that only trembled slightly. If he was going to die, he'd at least try to take one of them with him. But the dragon stopped just outside what Marcus would have considered the optimal pouncing distance. The leader tilted its massive head, studying him with eyes like molten gold. It said something, a series of clicks and musical tones that definitely wasn't random noise. Language. The dragon was speaking. Marcus lowered his weapon slightly. "I don't suppose you understand English," he called out, his voice cracking only a little. The response was immediate. The dragon reared back and unleashed a sound that was part roar, part song, and entirely alien. But there was something in the tone. Not aggression, exactly. Curiosity, maybe. Another dragon, this one smaller and more blue than purple, approached from the right flank. It carried something in its claws, a piece of metal that Marcus recognized as part of his pod's outer hull. The blue dragon dropped the twisted steel at his feet and backed away, head cocked expectantly. Marcus looked down at the metal, then back at the dragons. They were waiting for something. He knelt slowly, keeping his eyes on the creatures, and picked up the hull fragment. It was scorched and twisted, but he could still see the manufacturer's stamp and the ship's registry numbers. "This is from my ship," he said, holding up the metal. "My escape pod. I crashed here 3 months ago." The silver-marked dragon made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. It gestured with one massive claw toward the Star-Relic, then back at Marcus. The meaning was clear enough. "Come with us." Marcus looked at his broken escape pod, at the vast empty wasteland surrounding them, at the dying light of the alien sun. He had 2 choices: follow the dragons into the unknown, or stay here and die slowly of thirst and starvation. He shouldered his tool pack and followed the dragons. The Star-Relic was even more impressive up close. The crystalline walls rose in impossible spirals, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. The dragons led him through an opening that appeared seamlessly in the wall as they approached. No doors, no mechanisms, just solid crystal that flowed aside like water. Inside, the relic was alive with soft, pulsing light. The walls curved and twisted in ways that defied geometry, creating spaces that seemed larger than the structure's exterior dimensions should have allowed. Symbols floated in the air, glowing softly and rearranging themselves in patterns that made Marcus's head spin. The dragons moved through this impossible space with familiarity, leading him deeper into the relic's heart. They passed chambers filled with floating geometric shapes, corridors where gravity seemed to point in different directions, and rooms where the walls showed views of distant stars and nebulae. Finally, they reached what Marcus could only describe as a workshop. Ancient tools hung suspended in midair, held by fields of energy that made his skin tingle. Workbenches carved from solid crystal supported partially completed devices that hummed with barely contained power, and scattered around the room were pieces of technology that didn't belong. Fragments of modern starship hulls, pieces of quantum engines, even what looked like part of a human neural interface. The silver-marked dragon settled onto a platform that adjusted itself to accommodate his massive frame. The others arranged themselves in a loose circle, and Marcus found himself standing in the center like some kind of exhibit. The leader spoke again, those musical clicks and tones that conveyed meaning he couldn't quite grasp. But when it gestured toward the scattered ship fragments, then at Marcus's tool pack, the message became clearer. They knew he was a mechanic. They had been collecting pieces of crashed ships for who knows how long, and now they had found someone who might be able to make sense of it all. Marcus set down his pack and approached one of the suspended tools. It looked vaguely like a molecular welder, but operated on principles he couldn't immediately identify. When he reached for it, the tool settled gently into his palm, warm and strangely familiar. "You want me to fix things," he said, looking around at the dragons. "That's why you brought me here. You're not going to eat me. You need me." The silver dragon made what might have been a purring sound. It gestured again, this time toward a partially assembled device that Marcus recognized as a communication array. The design was clearly alien, but the basic principles were universal. With the right modifications, it might even be able to reach Earth. Marcus rolled up his sleeves and got to work. As he examined the alien components, he began to notice something interesting. The dragons didn't just watch, they helped. The blue one that had brought him the hull fragment seemed to have an intuitive understanding of energy flow patterns. Another, marked with geometric scars along its neck, could manipulate the floating tools with precision that would have made a master craftsman weep with envy. They were engineers, all of them. The dragons weren't just intelligent. They were builders, creators, problem solvers who had been trapped in this relic for who knows how long, surrounded by salvaged technology they couldn't quite understand. Hours passed as Marcus worked, with the dragons assisting in ways that gradually became more coordinated and effective. Language barriers meant nothing when you were troubleshooting a quantum flux stabilizer. A gesture toward a specific component, a tilt of the head to indicate the right angle, a careful claw manipulating delicate circuitry. Communication happened through the universal language of engineering. By the time he took a break, Marcus had identified at least 3 separate ship designs represented in the salvage. Human, obviously, but also something that might have been Zephyrian, and a 3rd design he didn't recognize at all. The dragons had been collecting wreckage for a long time. The silver-marked dragon approached, while Marcus was examining what looked like a piece of a navigation computer. It made a series of soft sounds, then did something that nearly made Marcus drop the component. It projected a hologram. Light flowed from the dragon's claws, forming a 3-dimensional image in the air between them. It showed the Star-Relic as it must have been millions of years ago. Not the half-ruined structure Marcus had seen, but a magnificent city that sparkled like a jewel against the stars. Ships came and went from docking platforms that spiraled around the city's exterior. Gardens floated in impossible configurations, filled with creatures that moved like living art. The image shifted, showing the passage of time in accelerated glimpses. The star grew brighter, more unstable. The ships came less frequently, then stopped coming at all. Sections of the city went dark, gardens withered, and finally, the dragons, the last inhabitants of their magnificent civilization, retreated into the relic's core, surrounded by the failing technology of their ancestors and the wreckage of ships from younger species who had found their way to this forgotten corner of space. The hologram faded, leaving Marcus staring at the silver dragon with new understanding. They weren't just engineers trapped with salvage they couldn't repair. They were the last remnants of a species that had built wonders, watching their home star die while their technology slowly failed around them. And they had been waiting, gathering the wreckage of other species' ships, hoping that someday someone would come who could help them understand the principles behind newer, more efficient technologies, someone who could help them rebuild what they had lost. Marcus picked up his plasma wrench and looked around at the assembled dragons. "Well," he said, "I guess we have work to do." The dragons responded with what could only be described as pleased rumbles, and Marcus couldn't help but grin. He had expected to die on this forgotten world, alone and unmourned. Instead, he had found the greatest engineering challenge of his life, and partners who understood the satisfaction of making broken things work again. The first step would be getting the communication array functional. If he could manage that, he might be able to call for help, not just for himself, but for his new companions as well. The galaxy was vast, but there were others who would understand the value of preserving an ancient civilization's knowledge. As he settled back to work, surrounded by dragons who purred like massive, scaly cats when particularly challenging problems were solved, Marcus reflected that this was definitely not how he had expected his career in starship maintenance to develop. But then again, the best jobs were always the ones you never saw coming. 2 weeks had passed since the dragons had brought Marcus into their workshop, and the communication array was finally beginning to take shape. What had started as a collection of incompatible salvage was slowly becoming something that might actually function across interstellar distances. The key breakthrough had come when Corinth, the silver-marked dragon whose name Marcus had learned through a combination of gestures, mathematical equations drawn in the air, and pure stubborn persistence, had shown him how their crystalline technology interfaced with quantum field manipulators. The ancient dragon tech wasn't just decorative, it was a form of organic quantum computing that put human processors to shame. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he made final adjustments to a relay that combined human engineering, Zephyrian power distribution principles, and dragon quantum crystalline matrices. It should have been impossible. Every engineering textbook he'd ever read said that mixing technologies from different species was a recipe for spectacular failure. But somehow, With the dragon's intuitive understanding of energy patterns and his own experience with practical problem-solving, they were making it work. Viren, the blue dragon who had first brought him ship fragments, coiled around a support pillar and watched him work. She had an artist's eye for balance and flow, often catching design flaws that Marcus missed in his focus on pure functionality. More than once, her gentle nudging had saved him from building something that would have worked perfectly right up until it exploded. The scarred dragon, Thresh, was their heavy-duty specialist. Those geometric scars weren't just marks. They were some kind of technological interface that let him manipulate matter at the molecular level. When Marcus needed a component that didn't exist, Thresh could usually manufacture it from raw materials. The process was fascinating to watch, even if it made Marcus's teeth ache from sympathetic resonance. Working with the dragons had taught Marcus more about engineering in 2 weeks than he'd learned in 5 years of formal training. They approached problems from angles that human minds simply didn't consider. Where humans saw individual components that needed to be connected, dragons saw energy flows that needed to be guided. Where humans relied on brute force solutions, dragons found elegant ways to work with natural forces. But the real revelation had come 3 days ago, when Marcus had finally managed to establish basic linguistic communication through mathematical concepts. The dragons didn't just understand engineering. They had been the engineers who built the Star-Relic in the first place. Not these specific dragons, but their ancestors, their civilization. The story Corinth had shared was both inspiring and heartbreaking. The Sithek, that was their species name, had been master builders for millions of years. They had constructed cities that danced between dimensions, ships that could fold space like origami, and weapons that could ignite dead stars. Their empire had spanned dozens of systems, and they had been working toward something they called the Great Synthesis, a melding of organic consciousness with quantum reality that would have elevated them beyond physical existence entirely. Then their home star had begun its death spiral earlier than predicted. The Sithek had evacuated their population to other worlds, leaving only a few volunteers to maintain their greatest achievement, the Star-Relic, which served as both monument and repository of their species' accumulated knowledge. But the evacuation ships had never arrived at their destinations. Something had gone wrong. Pirates, cosmic disasters, or simply the vast, uncaring distances between stars. The Sithek civilization had vanished, leaving only the handful of volunteers who had watched their star slowly die while waiting for rescue that would never come. Marcus had built communication arrays before, but never one that carried the weight of an entire species' desperate hope. Every connection he made, every circuit he tested, brought them closer to the possibility of reaching out to the galaxy and saying, "We are still here, we still remember, we still have knowledge worth preserving." The work was interrupted by an urgent harmonic from Viren. She had been monitoring their early warning systems, a network of crystalline sensors that the dragons had grown throughout the relic's structure. Something was approaching. Marcus dropped his tools and followed the dragons to what he had come to think of as their command center. Holographic displays showed the space around their world, and there, a bright dot moving against the star field, was an approaching ship. Corinth's mental voice, transmitted through the crystalline interfaces, carried mixed excitement and concern. The ship's energy signature wasn't familiar, but it was definitely artificial. Someone had followed the trail that had led Marcus here, but there was no way to know if they were friend or foe. Marcus studied the readouts with growing unease. The approaching vessel was larger than a simple explorer or merchant ship. Its energy signature suggested military-grade shielding and weapon systems. Worse, it was moving in a search pattern, systematically scanning each planet in the system. "Can we hide?" Marcus asked, then repeated the question in the mathematical symbols he'd learned to use with the dragons. Thresh's response was negative. The Star-Relic was too large to mask entirely, and its energy signature was unique enough to stand out against the dead world's background radiation. If the approaching ship was looking for something, or someone, they would find it. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He'd escaped one disaster only to walk into another. The ship out there could be pirates, slavers, or worse. And he'd led them straight to the last survivors of an ancient civilization who had no way to defend themselves. But Corinth's next communication surprised him. The dragons weren't helpless. The Star-Relic wasn't just a repository of knowledge. It was a fortress built by a species that had faced cosmic threats before. Weapons systems that had been dormant for millennia could still function, given the right activation sequences. Shields that had once protected against stellar radiation could deflect plasma bolts and missile strikes. The problem was that those systems were locked behind quantum encryption that required not just knowledge of the activation codes, but the specific neural patterns of authorized Sci-Fi operators. The dragons had the knowledge, but they lacked the quantum signature necessary to activate their own defenses, unless they could find a way to bridge the gap between species. Marcus looked at the approaching ship, then at his dragon companions, and felt a familiar rush of adrenaline that always came with his most challenging repairs. This wasn't about fixing a broken component. This was about jury-rigging a solution to keep everyone alive. The neural interface components he'd seen scattered around the workshop suddenly took on new significance. If he could modify one to work with human brain patterns, and if the dragons could adapt their quantum crystalline network to accept the input, they might be able to create a hybrid control system. It would be dangerous, maybe lethal, but it was their only chance. Working with desperate efficiency, Marcus began modifying a salvaged neural interface while the dragons prepared their ancient systems for activation. The approaching ship was still hours away, but he could feel time slipping through his fingers like sand. The neural interface had originally been designed for a different species, something with a distributed nervous system rather than a centralized brain. Marcus had to completely rewire the connection protocols using principles he was making up as he went along. One wrong connection could fry his neurons. Too much power could kill him outright. But mechanics don't give up, and they sure as hell don't give up when their friends are counting on them. Viren worked alongside him, her artist's understanding of energy flow helping to smooth the rough edges of his modifications. Thresh manufactured components as fast as Marcus could describe what he needed, and Corinth coordinated their ancient systems, bringing weapons and defenses online that hadn't functioned since their star was young. The modified interface looked like a crown made of crystalline threads and quantum processors. When Marcus placed it on his head, he felt the strange, tingling sensation of the dragon technology trying to establish connection with his nervous system. For a moment, the sensation was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a fire hose while being struck by lightning. Then the connection stabilized, and Marcus found himself aware of the Star-Relic in ways he'd never imagined possible. He could feel the massive structure around him like an extension of his own body. Energy flowed through crystalline conduits that pulse with the rhythm of a vast heart. Sensors spread throughout the structure fed him information about temperature, structural stress, energy distribution, and the approaching ship that was now close enough to begin detailed scans of their world. The weapon systems came online with a sensation like flexing muscles he'd never known he had. Plasma cannons that could vaporize asteroids, gravity manipulators that could crush incoming missiles, and defensive screens that could absorb the output of a small star. The power was intoxicating and terrifying. Through the relic's sensors, Marcus could see the approaching ship clearly now. It was definitely military, a heavy cruiser with the sleek lines and energy signatures of human construction. The markings identified it as a vessel of the Terran Confederation Navy. Marcus almost laughed with relief until he noticed the ship's behavior. It wasn't conducting a rescue mission. The scanning patterns, the way it approached with weapons powered and shields raised. This was a hunting expedition. Someone had tracked the emergency beacon from Marcus's escape pod, but they hadn't come to save him. They had come to silence him. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. His original mission, the one that had led to his escape pod crashing here in the first place, hadn't been the simple cargo run his employers had told him it was. He'd been carrying something important enough to kill for, and someone wanted to make sure no witnesses survived. The cruiser began launching sensor probes toward the surface. In minutes, they would detect the Star-Relic's energy signature and the human life signs within. Marcus had to choose: surrender and hope for the best, or fight back with weapons that could reduce the incoming ship to component atoms. But Corinth's mental voice cut through his indecision with a third option. The Star-Relic wasn't just a fortress, it was a ship. A massive, incredibly powerful ship that had been designed to travel between dimensions as well as solar systems. The Dragons had never used it to escape because they had been waiting for their people to return. But their people were never coming back. It was time to leave their dead world behind and find a new home among the stars. Marcus felt the relic's engines wake up around him, systems that had been dormant for eons flooding with power drawn from the quantum vacuum itself. The massive structure shuddered and began to lift away from the planet's surface, shedding millions of years of accumulated dust and debris. The human cruiser immediately changed course to intercept, launching missiles and charging weapons. Whoever was commanding that ship was serious about making sure Marcus didn't leave this system alive. But Marcus was no longer just a stranded mechanic with a plasma wrench. He was the neural center of a weapon system built by a species that had conquered space while humanity was still learning to use fire. The incoming missiles were swatted aside by gravity fields. The cruiser's plasma bolts were absorbed by shields that barely registered the impact. Marcus could have destroyed the attacking ship with a thought, but something held him back. Those were human beings over there, even if they were trying to kill him. Instead, he reached out with the relic's communication systems and transmitted a simple message. "This is Marcus Chen, aboard the vessel Synthesis. I'm leaving your jurisdiction. Do not follow." The response came in the form of a full salvo from the cruiser's main batteries. The captain over there had apparently decided that negotiation wasn't an option. Marcus sighed and disabled their ship with surgical precision. Weapons offline, engines dead, life support intact. Let them explain to their superiors how they'd been outgunned by a supposedly dead mechanic and his alien friends. As the Star-Relic, now the ship Synthesis, accelerated toward the edge of the system, Marcus felt the Dragons' joy and anticipation through their shared connection. They were free. After millions of years of waiting, they were finally leaving their prison behind. But freedom came with new challenges. The Synthesis was powerful beyond imagination, but it was also a unique target that would attract attention from every major power in the galaxy. They needed allies, a place to hide while they figured out their next move. Marcus thought about the modified communication array still under construction in the workshop, and about the desperate message it was meant to send. Maybe it was time to turn that message around. Instead of calling for help, maybe they should be offering it. The galaxy was full of lost civilizations, forgotten colonies, and species struggling to survive in the vast darkness between stars. The Synthesis could be more than just a refuge for the last dragons. It could be a beacon of hope for anyone who needed sanctuary. As they entered hyperspace with a sensation like stepping through a doorway made of lightning, Marcus began planning their next phase. They had a ship that was part starship, part space station, part mobile research facility. They had knowledge spanning millions of years, and they had the most advanced hybrid human-dragon engineering team in the galaxy. Time to see what kind of trouble they could get into together. 6 months after fleeing their dead world, the Synthesis had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a mobile sanctuary that appeared wherever desperate people needed help most. Word had spread through the underground networks that connected refugee populations, failed colonies, and forgotten outposts. There was a ship crewed by humans and dragons that could solve the impossible problems no one else would touch. Marcus stood in what had once been the Dragon's workshop and was now the nerve center of the most unusual engineering operation in known space. Holographic displays showed their current project, a dying mining colony whose life support systems had failed after a corporate withdrawal left 3,000 people stranded on an airless moon. The local government couldn't afford a rescue mission, and the transport companies wouldn't risk their ships for people who couldn't pay. But the synthesis didn't work for money. Corinth coiled around the central command platform, his silver scales reflecting the soft glow of the crystalline interfaces. The neural link Marcus wore had evolved over the months, becoming less of a crude modification and more of a seamless bridge between human intuition and dragon engineering philosophy. Through their shared connection, Marcus could feel his friends' satisfaction as they finalized their approach to the colony's problems. The solution was elegant in its complexity. Rather than simply evacuating the colonists, they would repair and upgrade the existing life support systems using a hybrid of human durability engineering and Sci-Fi quantum efficiency principles. The colony would emerge from the crisis not just surviving, but thriving with technology that could support 10 times their current population. Viren had spent weeks designing atmospheric processors that looked more like living art than machinery. Her aesthetic sense had proven invaluable in creating systems that the colonists would want to maintain rather than merely tolerate. Beautiful technology lasted longer because people cared about preserving it. Thresh had been manufacturing the components they would need, his molecular manipulation abilities producing materials that didn't exist in any catalog. The geometric scars that covered his hide had grown more intricate over the months, evolving as he learned to interface with human tool designs and manufacturing principles. But the most remarkable change had been in the dragons themselves. Contact with human engineering approaches had awakened something in them, a creative flexibility they had lost during their long isolation. Where Sci-Fi tradition demanded perfection and timeless elegance, human pragmatism embraced quick fixes and adaptive solutions. The combination was producing innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. The workshop had expanded to fill entire chambers of the relic, with human tools hanging alongside floating Sci-Fi devices. Workbenches carved from quantum crystal supported projects that ranged from improved water recyclers for frontier settlements to communication systems that could punch through interstellar interference. Every project taught them something new about the possibilities that emerged when different approaches to problem-solving collided. Marcus checked their arrival time at the mining colony and smiled. They would drop out of hyperspace in 2 hours, which gave him just enough time to complete the modifications to the atmospheric processors. The work was delicate. One wrong connection could turn a life-giving machine into a poison generator. But his hands were steady and his mind was clear. Working with the dragons had changed him in ways that went beyond the neural interface. Their million-year perspective had taught him to think in longer terms, to consider not just whether a solution worked, but whether it would still be working decades from now. Their intuitive understanding of energy flow had made him a better engineer than he'd ever imagined possible. But perhaps more importantly, their fierce loyalty to each other and their shared purpose had given him something he'd never had before. A family that understood the deep satisfaction of making broken things work again. The mining colony appeared on their screens as they dropped out of hyperspace, a collection of pressurized domes clinging to the surface of a barren moon, their lights flickering with the irregular patterns of failing power systems. The distress beacon painted a grim picture, oxygen reserves down to 18 hours, carbon dioxide scrubbers operating at 30% efficiency, and 3 critical failures in the main power grid. Marcus felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with a challenging repair job. This was what they were good at, arriving at disasters and making them into successes. The synthesis approached the colony with careful precision. The massive relic ship dwarfed the mining installations, its crystalline spires and flowing architecture making the utilitarian domes look like toys. But Marcus had learned that showing up in an obviously superior vessel could be counterproductive. People needed to feel like partners in their own rescue, not charity cases being saved by their betters. Corinth handled the initial communications, his translated voice carrying centuries of diplomatic experience. The colony administrators were suspicious at first. Their previous corporate owners had made promises that turned into exploitation. But when the Dragons began transmitting detailed engineering analyses of the colony's problems along with proposed solutions, skepticism turned into cautious hope. The repair mission launched with the coordination of a military operation and the enthusiasm of a community barn-raising. Human engineers from the Synthesis worked alongside Dragon specialists and colonial technicians, sharing knowledge and techniques in both directions. The colonists had developed clever workarounds for their failing systems, adaptations that had kept them alive when textbook solutions would have failed. Marcus found himself working with Elena Vasquez, the colony's chief engineer, to install one of Viren's artistic atmospheric processors in the main life support hub. Elena had been maintaining systems with salvaged parts and creative improvisation for months, and her practical expertise complemented Marcus's hybrid training perfectly. "This is incredible work," Elena said, watching Thresh shape a crystalline component that would improve the processor's efficiency by 40%. "I've never seen manufacturing precision like that. How does he do it?" Marcus grinned. "Very carefully, and with a lot of practice. Thresh has been perfecting molecular manipulation for about 3,000 years. He's what you might call experienced." The work continued around the clock, with dragons and humans sharing techniques that had never been combined before. Colonial welders learned to work with quantum crystal matrices. Sci-Fi energy specialists discovered the rugged reliability of human redundancy engineering. And in the spaces between technical discussions, friendships formed across species lines. By the time the last system came online, the mining colony had been transformed into something far beyond its original design. The new life support systems could handle population growth, environmental emergencies, and the kind of equipment failures that had nearly killed everyone. The power grid incorporated Sci-Fi quantum taps that could draw energy directly from the vacuum, making the colony energy independent for the first time in its history. But the real transformation was in the people. The colonists had gone from victims of corporate abandonment to partners in their own technological renaissance. They understood how their new systems worked, could maintain and improve them, and most importantly, had learned that they didn't have to face the galaxy's challenges alone. As the Synthesis prepared to depart, Elena approached Marcus with a proposal that caught him completely off guard. "Take me with you," she said. "I want to learn more about this hybrid engineering approach. My colony is safe now, but there are dozens of other settlements out there facing the same problems we just solved. I want to help." Marcus looked around at the dragons, feeling their approval through the neural link. The Synthesis had been designed as a sanctuary for the last Sci-Fi, but it was evolving into something larger. A mobile university where beings from different species could learn to work together on problems that none of them could solve alone. Over the following months, their crew grew. Engineers from rescued colonies, scientists from failed research stations, and artisans from dying worlds found their way aboard the Synthesis. Each new arrival brought fresh perspectives and capabilities, expanding their ability to tackle increasingly complex challenges. The galaxy's major powers began to take notice. The Terran Confederation issued warnings about unauthorized technology transfers. The Zephyrian Empire demanded inspections of the Synthesis and its cargo. Even the peaceful Arcturian Union expressed concerns about the precedent being set by a completely independent interspecies organization. But the Synthesis stayed ahead of politics by staying in motion. jumping from crisis to crisis across the frontier regions where central governments had little influence. They rescued failing habitats, upgraded obsolete infrastructure, and taught advanced techniques to anyone willing to learn. Their reputation grew into legend, the ship full of dragons and humans who could fix anything. The breakthrough that changed everything came during their intervention at Kepler Station, a research facility studying quantum crystalline structures that had been left unfunded and forgotten after a change in government priorities. The researchers had been struggling with unstable quantum matrices that threatened to collapse and take half the system with them. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, had been working on the quantum crystalline problem for 5 years without success. But when she saw the dragon's natural mastery of quantum crystal manipulation combined with human engineering pragmatism, she realized they were looking at something unprecedented. "You've created a new form of consciousness interface," she said, studying the neural link between Marcus and Corinth. "Not just translation or communication, actual shared cognitive processing. The human brain's pattern recognition abilities combined with Sci-Fi quantum intuition creates capabilities that neither species has alone." The implications were staggering. The neural interface technology could be adapted for other species combinations, creating hybrid consciousness networks that could tackle problems beyond any individual species' capabilities. It was the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization, one built on cooperation rather than competition. But power that significant inevitably attracted the attention of those who wanted to control it. The attack came without warning while they were upgrading a terraforming station in the Vega system. 3 heavy cruisers dropped out of hyperspace with weapons charged and targeting locks active. The lead ship transmitted a demand for immediate surrender, claiming authority under galactic security protocols that didn't technically exist. Marcus recognized the energy signatures immediately. These were the same forces that had tried to silence him at the dead world where he'd first met the dragons. Someone had been tracking their movements, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. But the synthesis that faced these attackers was not the desperate refugee ship that had fled 6 months ago. The dragons had been busy during their travels, upgrading and expanding their capabilities with techniques learned from human engineers. The weapon systems that had once been elegant but impractical artifacts were now deadly efficient tools designed with human ruthlessness and Sci-Fi precision. More importantly, the ship was no longer crewed by just 3 dragons and 1 human. Elena worked the defensive systems with the skill of someone who had learned to keep failing equipment operational under impossible conditions. Dr. Chen coordinated sensor networks that could track incoming missiles through quantum foam. Engineers from a dozen worlds operated systems they had helped design, fighting to protect the sanctuary they had built together. The battle was brief and decisive. The attacking cruisers had expected to face either primitive dragons with ancient weapons or humans with standard technology. They weren't prepared for hybrid systems that combined the best of both approaches. Their missiles were swatted aside by gravity manipulators controlled through neural interfaces that gave human reflexes access to Sci-Fi computational power. Their plasma bolts were absorbed by shields that adapted to incoming energy signatures faster than targeting computers could compensate. When the lead cruiser's weapons were disabled and its crew faced the choice of surrender or destruction, the captain finally revealed what Marcus had suspected all along. The original cargo he'd been carrying when his escape pod crashed had been prototype neural interface technology stolen from a classified military project. His employers had been black market arms dealers, and his pursuit by military forces had been a cleanup operation designed to eliminate witnesses. But that prototype technology had led to something far more valuable than its creators had ever imagined. The hybrid consciousness interfaces developed aboard the synthesis represented a fundamental breakthrough in interspecies cooperation. In the wrong hands, the technology could be used to create slave races or enforced loyalty systems. In the right hands, it could unite the galaxy's diverse species in ways that had never been possible before. As word of the battle spread through interstellar communication networks, responses varied dramatically. Some governments denounced the synthesis as a rogue organization operating outside legal authority. Others quietly reached out through diplomatic channels, seeking access to the hybrid technologies for their own purposes. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Ships began arriving from across the galaxy, not government vessels or corporate fleets, but small personal craft carrying individuals who had heard about the mobile sanctuary and wanted to join its mission. Engineers tired of building weapons, scientists whose research had been suppressed for political reasons, artisans seeking to create beauty rather than mere function. Within a year of the battle at Vega, the synthesis had become the heart of a fleet numbering in the hundreds. Each ship was unique, modified with hybrid technologies that reflected the creativity and values of its crew. Together, they formed something that had never existed before. A truly interspecies civilization dedicated to solving problems rather than creating them. Marcus stood in the expanded workshop of the synthesis, watching dozens of beings from a dozen different worlds collaborate on their latest project, a mobile research facility that would study quantum consciousness interfaces and develop new applications for peaceful cooperation. Human intuition worked alongside Sci-Fi elegance, Zephyrian efficiency supported Arcturian artistic vision, and completely new approaches emerged from the spaces between different ways of thinking. Corinth coiled beside him, silver scales reflecting the light from crystalline displays showing the fleet's current status. Through their neural link, Marcus could feel his friend's deep satisfaction, not just at their technical achievements, but at the realization that the Sci-Fi civilization would continue in a form their ancestors had never imagined. The dragons had been saved not through rescue or preservation, but through transformation. Their knowledge and capabilities had found new expression in partnership with other species, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. The great synthesis their ancestors had dreamed of had finally been achieved, not through transcending physical existence, but through transcending the barriers between different forms of consciousness. As the fleet prepared to jump to their next destination, a failed colony ship drifting between stars with 15,000 people aboard and life support systems held together with hope and desperation, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had expected to die alone on a dead world, but instead had found family among aliens, purpose in the space between species, and a future limited only by their collective imagination. The galaxy was vast and full of problems that needed solving. Fortunately, they had dragons, humans, and friends from a dozen other worlds who shared the fundamental conviction that broken things could always be fixed with enough creativity, determination, and cooperation. And mechanics, even mechanics who worked with living starships and quantum consciousness, never gave up until the job was done.